So now that we've covered the general conditions that a GC would look at when working on a project, we're going to turn now to site work and look at some of the strategies and procedures that we might be using. And of course, the first one is we're trying to conserve natural resources. And so one of the things that we're going to try to do is think about where the building is located on the site and its orientation and shape in order to minimize the slope disturbance. What most people don't realize is that there's a lot of nature, a lot of ecology stored in the soil. In fact, soil is the foundation for the quality of the local ecology. And when we begin to scrape it away and compact it, we begin to compromise not only the local ecology and life, but also the ability for water to penetrate, etc. And so what we want to do is minimize soil disturbance and erosion as much as possible. And in the 20th century, certainly, I don't think we really understood that or did a very good job there. And we certainly haven't done a good job at managing stormwater and groundwater during construction, or at least some of us haven't. We need to do a better job at that. And so also thinking about smart landscaping and native plants, and obviously maintaining habitat. This is going to be the goal here, is how do you minimize or maintain habitat? And one of the strategies we'll be going over for is completing the site. So first off, understanding trees actually are kind of complex. You know, where you see the drip line, in other words, where you see the leaves up on the trees, you're going to have roots below. And we tend to have a situation where we have guys or gals parking their trucks under the tree for shade, and those roots are being crushed by the trucks, and those roots are like straws. So over time, what ends up happening is when they get crushed, they can't pull water in, and the tree over 3 to 4 to 5 years dies after construction. Sometimes these are really nice trees. So what we want to do is not just go to the drip line in terms of putting up our orange fencing, but be really keeping clear of the entire area around trees in order to preserve them. Now, protecting the site during construction is obviously LEED asks for this, where you want to try to avoid building in wetlands, parks, really good farmland, etc. And certainly we'd rather build in brown and gray fields. We typically want to build in previously disturbed sites so that those areas of the natural landscape and ecology are left undisturbed. We also like infill sites. So if you're building in the city, which is an obvious choice, building between buildings that have already been built before is really where you want to go. Now, I said before about minimizing soil disturbance and erosion. So we want to look at really being careful there, and the way we dig our trenches and the way we open up the earth in order to put utilities in. There are ways to do that are less invasive. We can be using tunneling instead of just digging large trenches. And again, every time we can minimize our impacts is great. And we want to demarcate those edges. We want to mark the edges of the damage so that when we come back to finish up the site, we'll know where we have to pay careful attention to. Now, it would seem obvious to you that, at least in the U.S., we have erosion and sedimentation control laws. However, there are plenty of projects in this country that get built without really thinking about the edges of the project, and really thinking about runoff and erosion and sediment and how to control that. And so how do we stockpile topsoil for reintroduction? We want to kind of do all these basic things that if we don't, we'll pretty much stand the chance of losing our LEED rating system or our LEED rating. Because as you know, erosion and sedimentation control is a prereq for the LEED rating system. One of the strategies that I've seen used quite often in terms of minimizing site impact is actually completing the site prior to the actual completion of the building. And this has a lot of opportunities for us because once the basic coat of driveway or asphalt has been put down, not the final coat, but the basic coat, when trucks come in and out of the site, what we're doing is minimizing the dust and disturbance. So, you know, the site is done, but there's still a lot of activity on the site. We're really kind of reducing the idea of damage. And so this increases the contractor's control of the site. We have better laydown space for materials. We have better stormwater control. We have better staging areas. The only thing to kind of remember here is if you have a really heavy crane, you're going to want to try to figure out a way to make sure that you have spaces for that crane so it doesn't crush the asphalt. Certainly stormwater, by completing the site early, you're creating a better opportunity for stormwater control. But we definitely want to preserve the quality of natural features around the site. And so we need to take a lot of really comprehensive planning steps to make sure that water bodies are protected. Now, I know some of you think, well, it's nature, it'll just regenerate on its own. But that's really not the spirit of what we're talking about here. If you're in a pristine ecological zone, you really want to think about how you're impacting slopes, soils, and trees, etc. Sometimes you might have to exceed the local controls or local ordinances there. And obviously you want to minimize your impervious surfaces, which we'll talk about. Now, we want to reduce pollution from construction activity. So we want to prevent loss of soil. We want to use erosion and sedimentation. This is a little repetitive, sorry about that, but we know that by doing this, we're going to prevent a lot of air and dust particulate prevention. So here's some examples of how we might do some of this erosion control. And I'll ask you a question here. Which one of these tactics or strategies do you believe is the most effective in preventing or preserving a site's ecosystem? I'm going to start at the bottom. You can minimize grading wherever possible. That sounds good. Install and maintaining silt fencing is great, but it doesn't mean you're not disturbing the site. Hydroseeding stockpiles is good so that it will hold in some of that earth once it's been moved. Mulching disturbed areas, well, those are disturbed areas. And finally, leaving existing plants intact. Remember, those plants have roots. They're holding the soil together. Once you start removing those plants, you start to create damage on the site. So leaving existing plants intact is the #1 strategy. This is the Morris Arboretum near Philadelphia, and you can see in your picture here that this is the roadway, and this is where people are parking. And what you have here is a porous or permeable paving, allows rainwater to go directly into the earth, as it would on a normal site where there was no construction. This is great for watersheds and maintaining creek beds and helping to do that. There are no traditional curb cuts here. And these kinds of things have to be maintained. Most of the sustainable strategies and techniques I'll be showing you today require more maintenance than standard construction. So for example here, watching what plants you specify along this so they don't clog it up. And 2, making sure to come in and vacuum and sweep and clear out all the vegetation on top of these so they can function properly. So those were some basic strategies that we might be looking at from a green construction standpoint for site work. Next up, we're going to be looking at foundations and slabs.